Hello everybody and welcome to the video and live streaming show. My name's John Lacey and today on the show we're going to be talking about what's actually behind you in your videos or your live streams. Do you have a real set or real background? Are you working with green screens? Are you using additional tools to sort of remove some of those options that are out there in the background? So we will be talking about that today. So we are going out live to all the various places. So please let me know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. I must admit, I've got a lot of things happening simultaneously in my world. So it is always fun, and I do want to acknowledge the fact that normally I would be joined by my co-host Sam Proof, who you may know from the cute Avalanche cat cam. Some of you will probably already know that he's experienced a house fire recently, so he's still working through a lot of that stuff, and our thoughts are definitely with him. I just want to remind everybody that there is a fundraiser to help Sam and Amanda and their family sort of get back on their feet. So I'll just put this up on the screen for a second. So if you can support Sam and Amanda, you can certainly head over to the GoFundMe link up at the top there. I'll try and put that in the show notes later on for today's show. But let's check in with the chat. It's all happening this morning. I say this morning. It's the morning in my part of the world. Hello to from Saeed from Germany, where it's definitely not morning, and hello to Walter Strong III from the Huddle as well. And hi, Greg. Thanks for joining us. So, and again, it's funny. I love that I do this show at this time, but sometimes time gets away from me and it creeps up on me pretty quickly. So I'm going to talk about a few things you might want to consider in terms of actually going live and what's actually behind you. And there are no right answers here, so I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but I think it is kind of useful to think about. And Saeed is already recommending some great things, and I'll get back to those in a second. So what I want to do today, I want to talk about some of the options we have in terms of using a real background, and that's in a lot of ways, technically, that's one of the easiest things that you can do. So that's a great place to start. But also, if you don't have that option or you want to explore other things, we can virtually remove our backgrounds. We can blur out our backgrounds. We can use green screens or blue screens and chroma key to make them disappear. And I'll talk about that, and I'll talk about some of the feelings that some people have about the way that I do it, because I know not everybody loves the way that I do it, but I do want to just share that with you. So first of all, and I'm going to show you some of the ways that we can do this in OBS as well. So stay tuned for that. And if you do have questions or comments, leave them in the chats. That would be really, really awesome. I'm just going to be using this Elgato Facecam Make 2 to demonstrate a few things. And first of all, I just want to say that it's not particularly optimized for what I'm doing today. So I just keep that in mind. But I kind of wanted to talk about the Elgato Camera Hub software because it is really, really neat and it can do a whole bunch of different things. First of all, you can sort of change some presets. So if you wanted this to be a little bit more zoomed in, you could adjust that. Although, given where mine is currently positioned, that's not a great example. But you could certainly adjust why this zooms in. And again, Saeed will have a great tip on that, I'm sure, in a moment. We've got things like contrast. We can change the exposure. Again, because this is a second camera I'm only using for demonstration purposes today, it's not particularly optimized in terms of the lighting either. So we could certainly adjust that as well. We can do the white balance. And the great thing about this is you can actually use this as, I know... Saeed is absolutely right. Showing your real background requires the most work. You have to tidy up frequently. So, I mean, that's certainly a point. And I sort of threw some things together before going live because I don't normally show you this view, but I kind of needed to give you a sense of how this looks in real life. So we'll talk about that as well. But first of all, I guess, you know, and I keep saying this, but I kind of want to emphasize the point. There are no right answers, and I don't want you to feel bad. If you're making any kind of video content, that's amazing because there are so many people that just don't. So, first of all, reward yourself for that. But secondly, if you do, often the easiest place to start is actually with what is literally behind you. But as Saeed has mentioned, you kind of need to think about what that is. And My running joke here is that you don't want the voodoo doll of your boss sitting on the shelf behind you while you're talking to your boss. So, there could be all kinds of things that maybe shouldn't be in the background. They shouldn't be visible to the world. They might be slightly incriminating. They might sort of damage your reputation. So you do need to think about that. But conversely, if you do actually have indicators of expertise, maybe you've got a book. Maybe if you have that book sort of positioned somewhere in the background behind you, that could certainly add to your credibility as well. Hello to CG who's joining us in the chat as well. Great to have you. So, in some ways, from a technical perspective, I think it is the easiest way because you can just turn on the camera and you're good to go. But the thing is, you do need to think about what's actually there in the background. And do you have the ability to sort of rearrange the furniture? Do you have the money to buy some nice furniture? Think about, if you do have things, how do they relate to your branding colors? And, can you set up a set? Maybe can you have a few different angles from which you can actually work? So those are all really good things to keep in mind. And I'm really curious, if you do make video content, what approach do you take? Do you have a real background? Do you blur out the backgrounds? Do you have a virtual background? Do you use a green screen or a blue screen? Let me know in the chat. I'd love to hear about that. I'm just going to open OBS Studio in the background just so I can demonstrate some of this, or a second installation, I should say, of OBS, so I can show you how some of this works today. But I'm really excited to share this with you. And again, in some ways, and I'm going to start a new scene collection for this. So yeah, in some ways, I think it's really worthwhile thinking about what is actually behind you, because I see a lot of people that invest in really fancy neon lights, for example, and that's really cool. But is it competing with people's attention for you? Because in some ways, I think it is really, really worthwhile thinking about it. And again, obviously we'll talk about this in a moment, but obviously I have a bit of a bias towards the green screen because it allows me to do a whole bunch of different things. But again, it is just worthwhile considering. And hello to Stefan, who's joining us as well over on LinkedIn. So Saeed writes, I think if you use a virtual background, you should at least put some effort into it. Just using an oddly attached image downloaded from people with too much going on in the background is very disturbing, I find. I must admit, I think I've changed the zoom on my browser. I'm finding it a little bit hard to read, but I'll figure that out. That's fine. So yeah, I guess that's the other thing, and we'll talk about this more in a moment. But it's very easy to have a cheesy background when it's virtual. And I think some people love that stuff. Some people love the novelty of that stuff. I don't really love it. I don't want to pretend I'm on the moon or at the beach for a variety of reasons, but not least of which because, I don't want to damage the trust other people have in me. And I certainly don't want to, I don't want to fake it. I think it looks a little bit cringe-worthy. So again, if you do actually have an actual set, I think that is really cool. And I don't want to disparage that, because in a lot of ways, the main reason I don't is just that there's nothing good behind me. And you will see some of the not good things behind me in a second. But I literally have the side of a bookshelf and the back of a door right behind me. And nobody needs to see that. So we'll talk about, how I'm using my green screen and, some of the things that we can do and some of the different options we have as well. So, let's actually just get into a bit of OBS stuff. And again, I know not everybody uses OBS. That's totally fine. A lot of these ideas can be translated to all kinds of different pieces of software. But, I love a bit of OBS. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to come back down here to my sources, and I'm going to add a new video capture device. And again, it's a good idea if you give these names. I will call this one Elgato Facecam, and I'll click OK. Then I've got to actually select my device from this drop down. So I will go Elgato Facecam Make 2. And like I sort of alluded to earlier, if you are using one of these great Elgato devices, they do have that camera hub, and that's where you can play with the virtual camera. So that'll actually give you a whole bunch of options, and you won't even necessarily need something like OBS. But for today, let's just pick the face cam. Again, you can see some of the stuff that's behind me, and again, all the standard disclaimers certainly apply here. None of the stuff that you'll be seeing on this camera over here is particularly optimized, so the lighting's a little weird. And you can certainly see lots of stuff behind me. So I'm just going to go to my my default device default. So this is the resolution. I'm going to start typing in. I'm just going to type 1, and you'll see that it'll go to 1920 by 1080. And in a lot of ways, that's probably all I need to do right here. Again, if you are actually streaming or recording, you probably want to think about your audio. But again, that's a little outside of the scope of what we're doing today. So you look at this, obviously, in the way that I've just said, you know, none of these things are particularly optimized for that camera. But again, I'm just showing you behind the curtain so you can get a sense of how some of these things work. So, and we'll talk about the green screen aspect of this as well. So I guess, you know, whatever you've got going on behind you is totally fine. And this is, well, potentially fine. I don't know what's going on behind you. But again, Saeed is just saying just a white wall is fine. You don't need to buy extra decoration just for your background. I mean, you don't have to, but it might be useful. It might be appropriate. You kind of need to make that call yourself. But so essentially what I want to say here, first of all, though, is obviously there's a whole bunch of stuff happening in the background behind me that I probably don't want to share. And in a perfect world, if this wasn't my second camera, I would probably just bring it closer to me and have it more centered so that it was getting the green screen on the right angle. But in this case, that's not going to be terribly useful. So what you can do, though, is if you hold down the Alt key and drag in, you can certainly crop any part of this. So again, the thing you've probably already figured out is that the green screen doesn't cover my entire background. And that is kind of the reason why I do have this floating microphone. And I know some people aren't into that at all, but that's fine. Different people will want different things. So again, I can just go Control Z if I want to get rid of that. But essentially, you know, we've got our camera here. And one of the things that Saeed does, which is really cool, and I think he does this in conjunction with the Move plugin, is that because the nature of a lot of webcams especially is that they are wide angle, you can sort of zoom in quite a bit. So, you know, even if I were just to, you know, maybe crop in a little bit, I mean, I don't really want to fill the frame with this because it will be a little bit pixelated, but I potentially could. Like, that is something I could certainly do. And especially if your background looks pretty good, but you know on the right-hand side or the left-hand side there is something a little bit weird, again, you can either reposition the camera physically or you can sort of crop and rescale that within the context of this particular frame, especially if you're using something like OBS. So that's something you can certainly do. All right, so I am curious though, if you are making video content, and again, there's no right answer here, and I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but I am kind of curious, like, how do you think about the background? Are there concerns about the background that you have? And, you know, what are some of the techniques that you might like to try? And I guess that's another thing that I want to call out, is that different projects and different pieces of content will want to have different background treatments. If you're actually on location, you probably don't want to blur out the backgrounds. You want to acknowledge the fact that you're literally at the beach. So again, you might want to think about the depth of fields, you know, for an artistic effect. But in reality, you really, you know, if you're there for a reason, you want people to know that you were there for a reason, or you might as well have just stayed at home. Okay, so, you know, those are some of the things that we tend to want to think about. And it's really interesting because when I'm here solo and I don't have my pre-show banter, I get through my content really, really quickly. And I kind of don't want to rush today. So we're going to take it slow. But again, if you did have unlimited budget, if you could do anything you wanted to, what would that look like? You know, if you did have a dedicated room that was a studio in your house, like, you know, there are certainly different things that I would love to have different setups. I'd like to have multiple green screens. I think that would be really, really cool. But again, like just having different chairs, maybe you've got a talk show type setup and you literally have somebody in it in one chair and you're sort of opposite them, or a couch, or there are great opportunities to bring in some of your branding elements as physical items. Okay. Yes, this is a great point. Thank you, Said. So Said writes, I work from my bedroom, so I also crop my camera. I have some cheap IKEA shelves in the background with some cheap LED strips. That's a great thing to think about too, because lighting is great, because in a lot of ways you want to make sure that you, as the subject of your videos, could be well lit, should be well lit. But also, we see lots of people with the RGB colors, the programmable lights in the background. If Sam was here in his garage, he would certainly have those going on in the background. So that can be really cool. Again, think about if they're adding to the overall experience or if they're a little distracting. I know that there's a friend of ours that that has a LED curtain, and it's really, really cool. But sometimes, depending on the pattern or the sequence that is programmed into it, I get completely transfixed by it, and I just watch the video and think, I didn't hear a word you said because I was so distracted by the background. But again, different people will want different things anyway, so that's definitely worth considering. So if you did have unlimited budget, and again, have a think about this because I want to revisit this at the end of the show, but if you did have unlimited budget, what would your ideal home studio look like? And would it have different sections for different types of content? I think that would be really worthwhile exploring, and we might come back to that at the end of the show. But, I want to explore some of those options that we have in terms of blurring out our background, in terms of, having a virtual background, whether that's an image or a video. Even if you don't have, even if you're working with a real background, if you are going to actually share your screen and you want to be masked out in the corner, we can certainly explore that as well. So that would definitely be worth some of the things that we want to cover later today. But as always, this is a collaborative show. So if you do have questions or comments, throw them in the chat. And certainly some people would love a green screen. Other people, it's funny. The green screen is actually one of the most controversial parts of my setup. People have a lot of feelings about it, and we will certainly revisit that in an upcoming segment. But this is the video and live streaming show. Today we're talking all about video backgrounds. So we're going to come back and talk about some of the more options that we have in terms of things that we can do.
We are constantly training our cats every interaction that we have with them. Mm-hmm. So when Johan would get on my counter before, this is 10 years ago, before I was the cat expert that I am now, Johan would jump on the counter. What was the first thing I did? I'd say his name, Johan. He loves that. That's a reward for him. He said, you just said my name. I would go over to him and I talk to him and be like, you can't be on the counter. Johan loves when I talk to him. Ding, that's another reward for Johan. I'd pick him up and put him on the ground, but I didn't want him to think I was mad at him. So when I'd pick him up very nicely and kiss him on the head and say, I love you, but you can't be here. I'd put him on the ground. I had just done 3 things that rewarded him for being on the counter. So I was encouraging him to continue doing that.
And that's a segment from Sam's podcast, Just Kidding Around, which you can learn more about over at cuteavalanche.com. Sam Proof is usually my co-host on this show, but as I mentioned earlier, he has unfortunately suffered from a house fire. So there's a lot going on in his life, so we probably won't see him for a little while, but our thoughts are certainly with him and his family. And if you do want to support the rebuilding effort on that front too, there is a GoFundMe page as well. I'll just throw that up on the screen so you can check that out as well. So I must admit, Sam has been now that he's had a moment to collect his thoughts, he has been posting a little bit more on social media about the degree of damage and I guess how the poor family are feeling. And it is quite a lot. So if you can do anything to support them, that would be greatly appreciated. And we do miss Sam, but again, take all the time you need, and would love to have you back when you're ready, but no sooner. Okay, so this is the video and live streaming show. Today we're talking all about backgrounds, and whether you're working with your actual backgrounds, whether you're working with a virtual background, green screens, blue screens, we have so many options these days, and they're all potentially useful in different contexts. So You know, they're definitely worth exploring. And again, like I said before, there are no right answers. There are no wrong answers here. We just want to explore some of the options that we have. Okay, and I just want to check in with the comments. And I swear I've done something with the browser because it's so tiny in my little teleprompter. But Saeed writes, I will move to a separate room soon. I want to point at least the wall behind me in a dark grey and keep the rest minimalistic. I think there is a lot to be said for minimalism, and that's kind of my design aesthetic as well. So again, I don't want to make my scenes too busy, whether that's virtually or, you know, or not. And Saeed, again, with a bit more cat content, I have 2 cats, so green screen isn't an option for me. It wouldn't survive a week. There is something to be said about that, absolutely. And Walter Strong the third from the Huddle, having good audio, stable internet, and functional webcam is what helps me strive in making quality content for my audience. You work with what you have as a creator. This is absolutely true. And I was actually on a LinkedIn audio event earlier in the week, and the question is, do you need lots of gear? And the answer is a little bit more nuanced than people think. I mean, the short answer is no, of course you don't. You can use whatever you've got lying around. You can use your phone or a webcam. But that said, if you are a gear enthusiast, and I love myself some gear, and you can afford to do that, you know, I don't think you should feel bad about that, as long as you're not going to great debt or, you know, going hungry. So absolutely keep that in mind. And of course, backdrops. So physical backdrops. I have totally forgotten about those, Saeed. I didn't even think about those during the week. So that's certainly something we can reflect on as we continue the show. And hello to Doug Lehman, who's joining us over on LinkedIn as well. Great to have your company today. So we are talking about backgrounds. So whether it's a literal background set that you've set up yourself, whether you're working with green screens, blue screens, you know, changing the depth of field, so maybe the background is blurry. And you can do that with cameras, you can do that with software as well. So we're going to explore some of those things today. Let's jump back over to OBS Studio. So again, and I just for the benefit of anybody who's just joining us, this is not a particularly optimized scene behind me. In a perfect world, I would have this camera positioned somewhere else, but the last time I demonstrated with this camera, I literally had it in front of the screen and I couldn't see a damn thing I was doing. So right now, it's currently, this is the Elgato Facecam, by the way, and it's sort of on top of the monitor. And that's not really a great placement for it. It's usually not the place you want to actually have it for an eye line. But again, just as a second camera, just so that I can demonstrate some things today, I wanted to include that. So here we've got my scene. I've got my Elgato Facecam as my video capture device. I'm actually going to create another scene. And let's just call this one green screen. And I must admit, I will be using a number of different plugins today, and I'll try and create a list of these later on today. But one of the ones I will be using is actually Source Clone. So this gives me the ability to reuse my sources in different ways, and the real benefit of this is that actually I don't need to have the same filters on these in all the same places. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to say copy of Elgato Facecam. Again, you can call these whatever you want, but it's a good idea to give them a meaningful name so you know what they are later on. And I'm going to choose my clone type, and I'm going to go to a source, and I'm going to pick the Elgato Facecam. So the great thing about this is I can make a whole bunch of changes to this and not affect it elsewhere. So sometimes it's worthwhile just to have a backup recording of your unedited, unfiltered camera as well. And that's something I haven't done in the past. I used to do it directly in the camera itself. Like I would record a backup in the camera. Unfortunately, for the quality of my camera, 1 hour's worth of footage is like 20 gigabytes of storage space. So that was a problem pretty quickly. So once we've got our camera source here, if you do have a green screen or a blue screen, you can actually right click on your camera. You can go up to filters and you can explore the effect filters. They do also have audio filters. They won't apply in this case because I'm not really using an audio device. But if we go to the effect filters, I can hit the plus sign. I can actually go to one of the many options that I have here, and some of these are built into OBS and some of them are plugin specific. So I'll talk about those in a moment. But certainly the chroma key is one that's built in by default. Again, if I select that option, I can give it a name, although in this case, I know what that is, so I will leave it as is. And here you can you can see already it's trying to remove the background. It is a little bit blurry here, and again, it's not particularly well optimized for this camera because I'm sort of using the other camera here, but I've played with this camera enough to know that I kind of want to increase the similarity to get rid of some of that background. But I guess the other thing too is because I'm kind of now on a dark background, I may not actually have a great indication of, you know, how well this is working. So again, if I just bring this back here, I can close it out for a second. What I might do is go down and add a color source. So again, in our sources, just go to the plus sign, go to color source, and I can pick a color. And in this case, it's sort of defaulted to a sort of off-white color, which I think is pretty good. So now you can see it's obscuring my camera, but I can move that down. I can either click and drag it like that, or I can actually use these up and down arrows in the sources tab. So here, like it feels, and again, I should say there is definitely, as much as I love the Elgato face cam, there is definitely a difference in quality between what you're seeing behind me and what you're actually seeing in this camera over here. But there's also a considerable price difference as well, and an optical difference. So if you do find that you've added a different shade of a background here, and maybe you need to come in and adjust these settings a little bit, you certainly can. So we have the similarity. So essentially, I guess before we even do that, we've got the key color type. So this is the color that OBS is looking to remove. And you've got green, you've got blue, you've got magenta, but you can also go in and sort of specify a custom color. So if you do have something that's different, you can add that in there. The main reason that we tend to use blue and green is that these are colors that aren't naturally found in most skin types. And I do say most skin types, there may be some exceptions, and you might need to experiment with this a little bit. But generally speaking, green is a pretty safe bet. We can adjust the similarity. So again, if I bring that down, you'll see that you can see all of the green. If I bring it up, it'll take some away. At some point, I can overdo that, and you'll see that you can start seeing through everything, which is a problem. So it's a good idea to sort of work on these settings. Again, compare what you're seeing in the filters with what you're seeing in the preview behind it. You can adjust the smoothness, the color spill reduction. I generally don't play with too many of these other settings. And in this case, I do feel like I'm quite saturated color-wise and probably in terms of the lights here. So I probably would adjust that as well. But, I can certainly do that. So once you've got that there, obviously the glaringly obvious thing in this particular example behind me is that my green screen doesn't cover my entire background. So this is often where I would come in and actually hold down that Alt key, drag in, and again, that leads to the floating mic, which people have feelings about. And again, I don't know how well you'll be able to see this, but there's a little green basket in my wardrobe behind me. And it has removed the color, although it's flicking quite dramatically. So again, let's just crop that out. And I could, in this case, because it's not particularly optimized for this, you'll see that some of me is actually being cropped out. So again, that's one way of working. And, in some ways, this is a much better implementation of that. I know because my green screen doesn't cover the entire background that I am cropping my boom arm of my microphone. Some people have a lot of feelings about that, and they always let me know. And it's funny, the last time that happened on LinkedIn, I just didn't have the energy to even get into it. And I think Saeed wrote back to that person to let them know that, yeah, that's just part of my setup. So I don't lose any sleep over this anymore, but I know it is kind of triggering for some people. The thing is, with my current camera, I probably could do a better, and the setup with the teleprompter, I probably could show more of the arm. But my big thing is, if you're here for the arm, the boom arm, you're not here to listen to me, and my content's probably not for you anyway. But I must admit, there have been times in the past, and there's a video on my YouTube channel, if you want to check this out, where I actually went and purchased a green cover for my microphone, so I could chroma key it out. But unfortunately, it kind of needed to be the mic needed to be a certain distance away from me to capture my voice well, and it just didn't really work. Like I would have the mic too far away and it would be out of frame. And again, that's a whole option for different things. You know, there are all kinds of opportunities you can explore in that regard. Okay, so yes, and this is a great point. So usually you would use extra lights or directly pointed at your green screen to remove your own shadow from it. Yes. So again, depending on how much distance, and that's another thing that you need to sort of consider is, your distance from the green screen and the distance from the light. So again, I actually don't do that. I've got two Elgato key lights that just light me up. And again, it's worked pretty well. Like, I know it's not perfect, but I think it's good enough for live streaming and video creation. The other thing, and I probably should have included this video so you could get a chuckle out of this, but you do need to be mindful of your outfits, your clothes, when you've got a green screen. And it's funny. I mean, obviously, I don't want to wear a green shirt when I'm in front of a green screen. And yet there have been times in the not so distant past where I've accidentally done that, and the results have been kind of hilarious. So, I have been a floating head in some examples, and especially in work meetings. And I don't actually have that many articles of green clothing, but I do have this fluoro yellow t-shirt, and it seems to be just close enough to cause havoc for this poor green screen setup that I have. And I kind of work with this for everything that I do. So, it's certainly something to be mindful of. You can, of course, go the complete opposite direction. I know Garen Bellini from Micro Studios has dressed up entirely in green screen outfits for special effects, and that can be quite funny as well. I sort of joked about being the headless horseman in the past with that particular green screen setup. But again, in terms of the green screens themselves, because I don't think I've addressed that yet, you have a lot of different options. And there are, the physical green screen that's self-standing. You've got ones that actually hang from the ceiling. You've actually got round ones, which you can, or round or square, that you can actually attach to your chair. Again, you might need to crop out more of the frame if you're using one of those, but they are fairly inexpensive. And I've actually played with just straight up green cardboard in the past. So it's a good idea if it's a matte finish rather than a shiny finish, but those are all options that you can play with. So, if you wanted to do that, you certainly could. So there are all kinds of options out there, and don't be afraid of this. Have a play. It may or may not be right for you, so don't invest too much money up front, and think about the lighting situation, because again, the better lit you are, the better lit the green screen is, the better results you're likely to have. But again, I think it's, I was talking earlier about the gear situation. If you're just a video nerd, by all means, play with this stuff. Have a good time, experiment. It's really, really fun. And again, you can play with all those special effects as well. So if you do want to do something for comedic purposes or for action purposes, I guess the only thing I would sort of caution against is like trying to convince people that you're in places that you're clearly not, because, unless they're in on the joke, I think it's more distracting than anything. So certainly keep that in mind. So this is the video and live streaming show. We're going to come back and talk about some of the options that we have in terms of removing backgrounds by other means. And we'll do that in just a second after I press one of these magical buttons. Which one will it be today? Let's try this one. Hi, I'm John Lacey, and in Build a Presentation Muscle, I want to talk about finding your voice, refining and sharing your message, using tools and technology to share that message, and looking after yourself as a creator. And that's a promo for my podcast, Build a Presentation Muscle, which you can learn more about over at johnlacey.com. The podcast all about showcasing your expertise through content creation. So you can check that out over there. There's definitely some topics I want to explore on that show in the near future, so check it out. All right, this is the video and live streaming show. It's funny, I used to joke that poor Sam couldn't get a word in edgewise, but it's a very different experience when you're filling an entire hour by yourself. Although, as I told Saeed a couple of weeks ago, Dame Edna famously had this expression that her idea of a talk show was a monologue interrupted by complete strangers. And, I just need to pace myself and not get through my content too quickly because I kind of, we have lots to explore. But that said, if you've got questions, got comments, leave them in the chat. If you are watching this somewhere where you can like or subscribe, those are things that we really appreciate when you do them. Okay, yes. I mean, this is a great submission from Saeed. So fun fact, you can get yourself a background that looks like a full bookshelf. It looks very smart. So yes, you certainly can. And again, like I'm, in some ways, I just use this green gradient thing behind me all the time because it's part of my branding. And I don't really dabble too much in the pretend office or pretend bookshelf area, but you certainly could. That's always an option. Again, just make sure that you do have the permission to use those images. They're royalty free, or you purchased them, or you've created them yourself. But it's a great opportunity to think about bringing, a little bit of interest in the backgrounds. But again, not so much interest that you're distracting people from your main content as well. So it's a bit of a balance that you need to walk a little bit. So certainly something you can consider. So in terms of actually removing the background with other tools, we do have, and again, all the software programs have some version of this built into them. So this may vary a little bit between program to program, but things like Microsoft Teams, things like Zoom, probably Skype, if that's still a thing. I don't know. I haven't used it in years. A lot of these things do give you the ability to blur out your background and to remove your background. Sometimes the software options are a little hit and miss, and I must admit, a lot of people have recommended some plugins, including some plugins I will demonstrate in this show. And I haven't found them to be that great, to be honest. I would much rather use a real green screen or a blue screen. Just make sure it's well lit and sort of chroma key it out, because you'll see shortly the limitations of some of this stuff. But let's talk about them. So let's head back over to OBS, and again, obviously I am so badly positioned here, so I'm gonna actually uncrop this because it's just annoying me. So you will see that, but in a perfect world, I would just physically move the camera, or I would sort of reposition myself in relation to the camera. And I'm kind of tempted to play with it, although it won't make very compelling viewing for you, I don't think. But if I don't know, maybe if I do something like that. So I guess the whole point of this, though, is that the physical placement of your camera is also important. So again, I can sort of hold down the Alt key and crop that in different ways. But again, it's going to be a little janky, and I only use that today for demonstration purposes. So let's talk about it. So I'm going to create another scene. I'll call this one background removal, if I can type, which evidently I can't. And again, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add, I'm going to, what am I going to do here? I'm going to get my source clone again. We'll just say camera 3. Doesn't really matter what we call these. So I'm going to grab the original camera just so that I can play with these things. So first of all, and again, this is something that you can download from the OBS Studio forums in the plugins section if you go to extend. But if I go to the filters, I've downloaded and installed this plugin already, but I just want to give you a sense of how it works. And again, the success of this will vary on a lot of different factors, and I can't reproduce all of the different factors for you today. So again, you can download these things for free and give them a try, and that's generally what I'd recommend you do. So if I go to the add effect filters and I go to, and it's literally just called background removal here. And again, I could change the name of that one if I wanted to, but in this case I won't bother. And you'll see that, again, that's taken away the backgrounds, but if you see me moving in the background, You can sort of see the edges of this. And the great thing about this is it does actually have the blur capability built in. So if I did just want to sort of blur out the backgrounds, I can literally just drag that there. And again, let me just move that out of the way. But you'll see that it's cropping my head pretty close in a way that is really, really quite unnatural. And again, we do have advanced settings that we can play with. So if I do go into the advanced settings, I can sort of change the threshold. I can make this more or less. Doesn't seem to be doing a lot of difference, but it is what it is. The contour filter, so the range. So again, this is kind of the problem I have with this in some ways, is that if I, if I make this 1, okay, that is really weird. So I guess this is actually doing some processing in real time, which is kind of weird. But the smooth silhouette. So again, if I want to smooth out the silhouette, I can certainly increase that, but it's probably going to look kind of weird. I don't know. I see lots of people using this, and I don't love it. I don't love it. But again, your individual setup may vary, so you may have different things going on with you. And I guess one of the things I probably should acknowledge, and I'll try not to smack the microphone when I do this, is that I kind of wear, in fact, let me turn this off for a second so you can get a sense of this. But I wear these headphones, and I love these headphones. I'm probably up to my 6th or 7th pair over 10 years. Well, actually, probably longer, potentially. But I like these headphones. They're very comfortable, but they do have this wire at the top here. And in some ways, that causes all kinds of problems. Whereas if I take this off, try not to mess up my hair. And now I can't really monitor myself, so this could be quite different. But again, let's turn off the advanced settings. And let me turn this back on. And again, I still don't, I really don't love that. It's so weird to me. So that's something you can play with. And again, that's the background removal. You can find that one on the OBS Studio forums in the plugins section. I'm going to turn that off. So there is that one. And the next one I want to talk about is the one that Saeed's already mentioned in the chat. Let's revisit the chat for a second. So NVIDIA Broadcast, Saeed is saying I use NVIDIA Broadcast to remove my background for certain scenes. It works pretty well. However, you need a PC rather, with an NVIDIA graphics card. So yes, you do definitely need that. And again, when I got a new computer at the beginning of the year, which is pretty souped up, and it's got all of the things. So that is the one that I'm going to show you now. So let's head back to OBS. I'm just going to remove the old filter. It's not currently active, so it won't really make a difference here. But so I guess the other thing too, like NVIDIA Broadcast is a piece of software. There is actually a part of the API which is just for this filter. So you can install one or both of those. But essentially we've got NVIDIA background removal. I click on this one. I could give it a name, but I think the default is fine. You'll see again, this works better, but again, my headphones are always going to be a problem. And, you know, if you don't like wearing headphones like this, if you've got earbuds, or maybe you don't need to monitor yourself in real time, you can always take them off. And I think that's what we'll find here, is when I take these off, it looks so much better. Again, if I move really quickly, I think that could potentially be a problem. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to add my color source. We'll grab the existing one, just that off-white gray color. Again, I'll just move it underneath my camera. You'll see that is actually pretty good, although it doesn't know what to do with my microphone. So if I move in different places, sometimes it can make this work, sometimes it really can't. And it's, I just find the results I get with the green screen are just much more consistent. But again, there are probably all kinds of settings you can come in here and play with. So you do need a CPU, and again, we've got the ability to change how much this updates in frequency of frames. But again, I wouldn't be putting that up too high unless you have a really spec'd up computer. You can adjust the threshold here, and you see if I bring it down to nothing. In fact, that's kind of funny. I like that, actually. There's something humorous about the way that it sort of silhouettes my my headphones, but again, it doesn't know what to do with its microphone. So, and again, it might be an opportunity for me to go and find a different colored microphone or microphone cover. But you've got those options. You can change the mode, so you can sort of have this in higher quality or better performance. But again, I don't love this, and I'm curious, how if you guys have been playing with things like this, how have you found them? Have they worked for you? I'd really love to hear more about that. So this is the video and live streaming show. Today we're talking all about backgrounds. So whether you're actually okay, I misread that and I thought you were making a joke, but Saeed is writing. The better you are lit, the better it works. And I suspect probably the more depth of field you have, the better it would be as well. So again, I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying I haven't had great success with it. So again, you can play with it to your heart's content. I really love the green screen approach. Obviously, that's my bias here. But I guess the other thing that's probably worth articulating, and you've probably already seen it with the, with the green screen example here, is that the problem with green screen is it can work really well from one angle, but if you've got a second angle, that means potentially I need multiple green screens. They're probably all going to be slightly different angles, slightly different distances from the light source. So that is something that you will need to consider. But in a lot of ways, certainly from a technical perspective, obviously the thing that Saeed said earlier is definitely true. You do need to think about what's actually in the background. You need to tidy up before you go live, that kind of thing. But you certainly have great options in terms of switching to different cameras if you are just doing a straight normal background without sort of too much embellishment. But this is the video and live streaming show. I want to show you a way that you can actually mask out your camera, even if you don't have a green screen, even if you don't have any sort of special gear. We'll come back and do that in just a moment, but I hope you're enjoying the show. Thank you so much for being here. Don't forget to hit that like and subscribe, and I'm going to press this button.
If you've been watching us for a while, or this is your first time and you're thinking, Sam, John, this is great stuff, but I'm wearing a lot of hats already and I don't need to add this to my list of things that I'm doing, but I really want to live stream, I've got you covered. I've been a freelance technical director and stream operator for 20 years, and I can help you either with one-on-one counseling, setups of shows, or even run your whole show for you. Get in touch with me, samproof@gmail.com, or find out more at samproof.tv.
And you can certainly reach out to Sam if you need help with those live production services. He does definitely have a lot going on at the moment, but he does have access to the internet and the phone, and he's been supplied with a laptop, so he can certainly get in touch with you and help you out with those sorts of things if you like. So thank you so much for being with us. Doug Lehman is saying better lighting, equally light the background to prevent shadows. Plus, you have to light the subject. Yes, so that's certainly a whole thing. And I must admit, I feel like I've been pretty lucky because I haven't had to wrangle too much in terms of the lighting. The Elgato key lights, they're very powerful, but they're also incredibly diffused lights. So it's worked really well for me. And again, it is certainly a different experience if I'm broadcasting at night. But again, we have all kinds of settings. And again, I just really today, I'm not really telling you what to do or what not to do. I just want to show you some of the things that you might like to explore. So if you don't actually have a green screen, or you don't want to use one of those background removals, occasionally there'll be situations where you want to feature something else within your video frame, but and you also want to be there as well. So I want to talk about sort of the masking options that we have in terms of OBS more generally. So let's head back there. I've actually just thrown in an image, which is a screenshot of my YouTube channel. This is probably in a real world situation. This is would likely be an actual screen capture. So, and if you don't, I'm gonna do some content about this because people keep asking me. But essentially, if you go to add new sources, if you want to capture your screen for a tutorial, you've got the ability to capture the display, which is the entire screen, the entire monitor. You've got the ability to actually capture a particular window. So, that's, you know, an application on your computer potentially. So those are basically the two options that I would generally recommend. But again, I'll do some more content on that later on. And because I'm running this entire live show with two versions of OBS, monitoring in StreamYard, and I have a fourth monitor, which just keeps me on track in terms of time, I don't really have anything I can share with you. So we're just going to use this as an example. So again, if I drag this down the bottom, and we'll just hide the color source. So what I probably would want to do, and the great thing about having, you know, separate cameras is that, you know, when I'm looking at this camera here, I can address you directly. But if I wanted to move to, you know, this one over here, I could look at the monitor that I'm potentially demonstrating as well. So what we can do, and again, this involves a few different plugins potentially, although you can do this yourself, is that you can go to right click on here, go to on your video capture device, right click and go to filters. And again, we've got all our options here. So we do have the ability to add masks. And again, I've actually installed the advanced mask plugin, and that's something that Saeed and I demonstrated a couple of weeks ago, but it is really cool. So I thought I'd revisit it. So again, we can click on that one. We can give it a name if we want to. You'll see it's already cropped to me, although it's cropped to me a little bit too high in the frame. I think the classic thing to do is to put ourselves in a circle. So again, the mask effect type here is alpha mask. We're going to choose a shape in this example, and I'm going to go to circle. It's probably a little bit too big. Let's make that a bit smaller. And you can sort of adjust this, or I can type in a number. Let's say 300. But I also want to adjust the X and the Y axis. So, you know, I can drag this up and down. So that's probably a little bit closer to where I want to be, although it still feels a little bit too big. So let's maybe try 280 pixels. Okay, I can probably live with that. And again, I could increase that, make it bigger or smaller, whatever I want to do. It's actually surprisingly difficult to make choices live on camera. But yeah, you can certainly do that. I'm gonna, there we go. I think that's okay. So again, you could tweak this, and if you're doing this for real, you'd probably put a little bit more effort into it than I'm doing right now. But we can adjust the X and the Y of it all. But you do have all these other shapes built in. So we could have a rectangle. We could have a star. Star's probably a little bit dramatic here. We could have a love heart as well. And again, let's just stick with a circle, because that's the classic thing that a lot of people want to actually do. So we could do that. We've also got feathering options here. So we can feather inner, middle, or outer. So if I do the inner one first, you'll see the amount is 0. But if I bring that in, you'll see that it's sort of, it's feathering from inside that round circle, which is great. But we can also do outer. So again, same sort of thing, but it's actually going to, if I actually hold that down, it'll actually make the capture a little bit bigger. And in some ways, I need to be a bit careful about how much I do, because I have restricted myself to a particular size. So I've also got middle, which is interesting. I imagine that's probably a little bit of both. So it is sort of growing, yeah. But again, if you want to have sort of soft edges, you can certainly do that there. And I've got myself there. I'm probably a little bit too big in this frame. So again, if I drag the corner, just pull it in, and then I can reposition myself wherever it makes sense for me to be. And that's something that you can stream with. That's something that you can record locally with. You can also use the virtual camera. And again, I'm obscuring that button here, so let me move myself out of the way. And the virtual camera too, I've spoken about it before, but if you are new to this, the virtual camera will take whatever you're doing in OBS Studio and make it available to other pieces of software. So whether that's things like Zoom or Microsoft Teams or Google Meet, you know, and that's a pretty integral part of everything I do, because even though some tools have some capability for removing the green screen behind me, most of them aren't that great. So again, it's worth exploring how you want to do that. Okay, so that's certainly another thing that you can do. We could also potentially come in here and use some of those other filters in conjunction with this. So if I wanted to, you know, maybe I could, in fact, I think I've still got it here. So I can remove the background. And you can see that's sort of happening behind me. And again, the order of these is potentially important because it can sometimes change. But I could remove the backgrounds. I could maybe just create another shape. And I guess that's another thing that's worth mentioning too, is if I were to remove the backgrounds, I can actually come in and add a filter to a color source. So if I go to the color source, I go to my advanced mask. I think from memory, we made that a circle. And I think it was around 280. And again, I could sort of potentially resize this. And you probably want to do this a little bit more mathematically than I'm about to do right now. But I could come in here and I could maybe remove the advanced mask here. I could maybe turn this back on or turn the chroma key back on as well. So even if you don't actually have a mask applied, you know, you have options. You can do all kinds of things to make that visually more interesting. But those are just some of the things that you can do. But I kind of want to go back to this original idea. If you did have unlimited budget, if you did have the ability to create the studio of your dreams, what would that actually look like? And again, I don't want to make anybody feel bad, but I do really want you to take some time to think about that and dream of it and think about what is appropriate. I guess one thing I didn't mention here, and I haven't had a chance to demonstrate, is that you can remove a background and you can actually incorporate a video as the background. And that can be really interesting. It can also be potentially quite distracting. So again, think about what that is. But also think about the file size of that particular video, because if it lags and it gets a bit disjointed, that will distract people quite a lot. So I've actually subscribed to something called BusyBox, which gives me all kinds of fancy backgrounds. I hardly ever use them, but I like knowing that they're there if I do want to use them. And they're things like fireworks and fire effects and sort of overkill for what I'm doing, but I do like having them there to pick from. So it's certainly something that we can potentially play with. All right, cool. I'm literally just going to take myself off camera for just a second. I think I might be having a slight allergic reaction to something, but anyway, we'll go have some antihistamines and we'll check that out later. But anyway, I hope this has given you some things to consider. Again, it doesn't really matter where you start, but it certainly can be fun to play with, and it can really help with different things. Again, my bias in some ways is towards that green screen thing, so I can sort of superimpose myself into software tutorials because that's so much of what I do. So I love that. Sayed is saying that it would be great to have a complete green screen room. It would be super fun. Disturbing, but fun. I don't know how disturbing it would be, but certainly that is something that you could have a play with. So thank you so much for joining me today. I'll be back again the same time next week. I'm not really sure what we're going to be talking about next week, so if you do have things you'd like me to explore, let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Don't forget to like and subscribe wherever you happen to be watching this, and have a great weekend, and I'll talk to you again very, very soon. Thanks, everybody.